The movie opens on July 8, 1986, in a small town called Walson, where we meet two men named Teemo and Pierre. They are currently in Pierre's apartment, watching a video of a young girl. Afterward, they get into his red car and leave the house. They soon notice a young girl named Pia passing by on her bicycle, which prompts Pierre to come up with an idea. He reverses his vehicle and begins following her through a remote wheat field. After ensuring that no one is around, Pierre gets out of the car, but the girl quickly realizes that the man is about to harm her. Unfortunately, he catches up with her and begins assaulting her in the wheat fields. Meanwhile, Teemo is horrified by what's going on. It is evident that he doesn't condone any of this, but he also does nothing to stop his friend. He picks up the girl's headphones, which had fallen to the ground. Once Pierre's finished, he apologizes to Pia, but she starts hitting him frantically, so the psycho hits her with something to keep her quiet. But moments later, Pierre realizes that the girl is dead and begins to panic. He asks Teemo for help, but the latter becomes terrified and just returns to the car. Pierre thus puts the girl's lifeless body in the trunk and throws her bicycle into the wheat field. The two then drive away from the scene, but not before Pierre asks Teemo to throw away the headphones. A few days later, we notice several children playing in a park, where Pierre works as a caretaker. He is thoroughly cleaning his car when he notices Teemo in the distance, carrying his backpack. Pierre attempts to approach him, but Teemo immediately boards a bus and departs. It appears that the man is traumatized by what he witnessed and wishes to escape this place. The scene then cuts to 23 years later, where we see a woman named Elena jogging. She soon arrives at the wheat field, where a cross is displayed as a sign of remembrance for Pia's death. It is revealed that Pia was actually her daughter, who was murdered in 1986. Elsewhere in the same town, we see a couple angrily berating their teenage daughter, Sinikka. It turns out the young girl has been reported for skipping school several times. Her enraged father demands to know the reason for this, but Sinikka becomes defensive and claims the school is lying. She even curses her father and storms out of the house, saying she needs to go to tennis practice. But after riding her bicycle for a short distance, Sinikka calls her friend, Marie, to arrange a meetup. The scene then cuts to a detective named David arriving to attend the retirement party of his senior, Christian. David doesn't seem too thrilled, and it's revealed that he has recently lost his wife to cancer. In another scene, we see Sinikka arrive at an amusement park to meet her friend. She leaves a voicemail for her parents, explaining that she will stay at Marie's tonight and won't return home. However, as it's starting to get dark, her friend still doesn't show up. Sinikka becomes scared and leaves a voicemail for Marie, saying she'll head home if her friend doesn't show up soon. We also notice that it seems like someone is keeping an eye on her from a car. Elsewhere, after the party, Christian takes David to the police station and hands him the file of a case he could not solve. 23 years ago, an 11-year-old girl named Pia was assaulted and murdered, and her body was only discovered many days later in a nearby lake. A boy reported seeing a red car in the area, but police were never able to find the murderer. David then notices that the incident occurred on July 8, which is coincidentally the same date as today. In the meantime, we see Sinikka returning home after her friend failed to show up. The car from earlier is still following her, so, at one point, she stops and turns around to see what's happening, right when a man gets out of the car. After some time, we see him throwing her bicycle in the same field where Pia was murdered. The scene then cuts to Teemo, who now works as an architect and has a loving family. He returns home after a long day at work and checks on his daughters. He then goes to his room and falls asleep with his wife, Julia. The next morning, David is startled awake by a sudden call. He soon arrives at the wheat field, where he meets his colleague Jana and their new boss, Matthias. It turns out that the police have discovered Sinikka's bicycle in the wheat field and are concerned. At Sinikka's house, her parents still believe that she is safe at her friend's house. Later, we see Teemo playing with his children at a house party, but his attention is soon drawn to a news story on television. The report reveals that the police discovered a girl's bicycle and gym bag in a wheat field and suspect a similar pattern to Pia's case. Upon watching the news, Sinikka's parents recognize her bicycle and begin to panic.
Teemo is also shaken by the news and walks away from his family to process it.
Elsewhere, we see David and Matthias at the largest lake in town, where Pia's body was discovered many years ago. They have brought a diving team to search for the girl, but unfortunately, no signs of her are found. The cops later head to Sinikka's home and speak with her distraught parents. Matthias inquires whether she had a boyfriend with whom she could have run away, but mom denies this. Later that night, we see Teemo, who is unable to sleep and is thinking about the new missing girl. He then recalls a flashback to 23 years ago, when he was sitting in a park, watching children play with water. He was soon joined by Pierre, and they introduced themselves. The two men quickly began bonding, and it was obvious from their behavior that they were both pedophiles and attracted to children. Returning to the present, we see a stressed Teemo trying to enjoy time with his family. He then secretly calls his boss, informing him that he's sick and won't be able to show up at work tomorrow. After receiving permission, Teemo approaches his family and explains that there's a problem at work that requires his immediate attention. Teemo promises to return tomorrow night and leaves the house. Next, we see a man returning to his car in a remote area. He suddenly hears a phone ring, and it is Sinikka's father trying to reach her, but the man throws the phone away. In the evening, David is visited by Christian, who brings a box of old belongings related to Pia's case. Christian expresses his belief that the person responsible for Sinikka's death is the same one who killed Pia. Christian strongly believes that the girl is already dead, her body is out there, and it's only a matter of time before the police find it. Since Christian is retired and no longer has authority, he asks for David's help with the investigation. We then see a flashback to 23 years ago, when Teemo used to regularly visit Pierre's apartment. One day, during their usual hangout, Pierre mentioned their similarities and their attraction to little girls. This made Teemo feel uneasy, and he denied it, but Pierre said he had movies they could watch. At first, Teemo became angry and tried to leave, but he soon changed his mind. Pierre then began playing a disturbing video in which an adult man was seen molesting a little girl. Surprisingly, Teemo wasn't repulsed by the video, and he actually enjoyed it. Returning to the present, the police are becoming increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress in the investigation. Jana then pulls out some files and points out that a red car was reported near the scene of Pia's disappearance. She reveals that, years ago, another girl had also disappeared, and a red car was spotted at that time as well. Jana was able to compile a list of around 500 red cars registered in the area in the 80s. Hearing this, David takes out Christian's old file and reviews the records. He notes that many of the car owners have already been interrogated, leaving only a few for further investigation. In another scene, Teemo, who has returned to Walson, meets Pierre, who is still employed as a caretaker at the same park. Pierre is overjoyed to see his old friend after so many years, and he invites him to his home. The two sit awkwardly in the living room until Teemo asks what Pierre did with the recent missing girl. The latter is stunned by the question and quickly denies any involvement in this case. When Teemo points out the similarities between the two cases, Pierre dismisses it as a coincidence. He insists that what happened with Pia was a one-time incident and that he hasn't done anything like that since. Soon, Teemo starts to feel uncomfortable and attempts to leave, but Pierre stops him and hands him a CD. He claims that it is Teemo's favorite video, and it features the dark-haired girl he used to like. Hearing this, Teemo hastily rushes outside while still clutching the CD. After a while, he returns to his hotel room and watches the CD. It turns out to be the same disturbing video he saw 23 years earlier, and it immediately turns him on. But after Teemo pleases himself, he feels immense shame and breaks down in tears. The scene then cuts to a flashback to that fateful day in 1986, when Teemo was waiting in the car while Pierre was disposing of Pia's body in the lake. The next day, Teemo returns to the park and sits on a swing while chatting with a child. At this point, Pierre approaches him and invites him to his apartment to watch a movie. Teemo reluctantly agrees and follows him. However, as they approach the house, Teemo is overcome with shame and runs away from there. The conflicted man then goes to the police station and decides to confess everything. But when the time comes, he cannot bring himself to do it and changes his mind. Next, Teemo goes to the wheat field and stares at it for a while. He then goes to Elena's place and pretends to be a tenant looking for a house. The woman kindly invites him inside, and Teemo informs her that he's looking for a house in this neighborhood and hands her his business card. Noticing the photos on the table, he proactively brings up the topic of children. When Elena mentions that her daughter was murdered 23 years ago, Teemo apologizes for bringing up the painful memory. After a brief conversation, he heads to his car and begins crying, which a suspicious Elena notices from the window. Later, Christian arrives at Elena's house, as they turn out to be in a relationship. She suddenly says the man who killed her daughter was just here and hands him Teemo's business card.
Meanwhile, David and Jana are going around town interrogating men who owned a red car in the 1980s. But David suddenly receives an urgent call and must leave. Jana then visits Pier's home alone and requests a conversation. On the other hand, Teemo arrives at the lake where Pia's body was discarded and sits there in silence. He then receives a call from Julia, who is upset that he hasn't come home in 3 days. She also reveals that their daughter has fallen off the trampoline, so an emotional Teemo asks to talk to his daughter. Just then, Julia tells him that someone is at the door and abruptly hangs up. It turns out that David and Christian have arrived at the house to interrogate Teemo. Elsewhere, Jana questions Pier about the red car he owned between 1982 and 1986. The man confirms that he did but has since sold it and now only rides a motorcycle. Jana then reveals that it's about a missing girl and asks where he was on July 8th. This makes Pier nervous, so he excuses himself, claiming he needs to get something. Returning to Teemo's house, his wife is bombarded with questions about him. She reveals that he is currently out of town for work but doesn't know which hotel he's staying at. Christian then heads to the bathroom, and Julia notices her husband's business card with David. This makes her nervous, and she begins questioning what all of this is about, but the detective simply responds that it's difficult to explain. On the other hand, Pier is seen taking out his diary from a drawer, and he also grabs a small knife. He then approaches Jana and begins recounting his activities on July 8th, which he had written down. The woman asks to see the diary, and he reluctantly hands it over. He also keeps his hand near his pocket, prepared to strike at any time. At the same time, David questions Julia about her husband's past and learns that he used to live in Walson when he was a student. The woman reveals that Teemo only moved to this town in 1986, where they met and got married. She also mentions that he didn't like his last name and changed it when he left Walson. Meanwhile, Jana finishes reviewing Pier's diary but doesn't find anything unusual and decides to leave. On the other hand, Juliet and David go to find Christian, and it turns out he's actually in Teemo's office, checking his computer. He then shows them the disturbing child pornography videos that he discovered in Teemo's folder. Julia feels sick to the stomach upon seeing this, as she had no idea her husband was a monster. Meanwhile, Teemo is still by the lake, contemplating everything. He soon makes the tragic decision to unalive himself. Sometime later, police officers arrive at the scene and lift the car along with Teemo's lifeless body. This makes Christian feel accomplished, and he believes that he has finally solved the case. Various news reports quickly spread, revealing that the perpetrator in Pia and Sinikka's cases has been identified after many years. The next day, an old man is seen swimming in a different lake in another area. But then all of a sudden, after a short time in the water, he accidentally spots a body, which turns out to be Sinikka's. Soon after, the police retrieve the body and inform her parents of the tragic news. Later, while her parents are in the autopsy room, David reviews the evidence and comes across a picture of headphones that belong to Pia. He then listens to the audio from a boy who was an eyewitness at the time. The boy had mentioned that the headphones were thrown from the passenger window of a car. This reveals that there was more than one person in the car, and Teemo was not working alone. Following this, David immediately approaches his boss and reveals that there was another person in the car, who is still free. However, Matthias dismisses this as a ridiculous theory because Teemo's DNA matches the one found on Pia's headphones.
The man was a pedophile and even changed his last name, hoping no one would catch him. However, David is even more confused when he discovers that Sinikka was killed but not assaulted. He wonders why a pedophile would commit such an act unless he intended to send a message. Therefore, David theorizes that the two men committed the crime together in 1986. But after Teemo disappeared without a trace, the second man recreated the murder in the same way and at the same location. Perhaps the pedophile felt lonely and wanted to lure his old friend back to town. However, Matthias refuses to believe this theory, and the confrontation soon turns physical. As a result, David is suspended from his job. In the final scene, a car enters a garage, and we notice that it's the same one Sinikka's killer was driving. Pierre steps out of the car, revealing that he is once again the perpetrator. He then hands over the keys to a neighbor woman, with whom he had borrowed the vehicle. The woman is reading a newspaper and informs him about Teemo, a suspected pedophile who took his life. Upon learning this, Pierre is devastated, as he never wanted his friend to take his life because of his actions. The movie then ends with the sick man returning to his apartment and grieving over the loss of his friend. Thus, we reach the end of this film. Thanks for watching. You can like this video to support us. Don't forget to subscribe for more content. See you in the next video. Goodbye.